వందే మాతరం. సభాయ నమః. సత్యాన్వేషణ పథంలో ఉన్న సాధకులారా, నా తోటి భారతీయులారా, ఈ పిలుపును సార్థకం చేయాలి అనే ఆలోచనతో ప్రతి భారతీయుడు సంకల్పించాలి అన్నదే భారత భాగ్య విధాత భావన అని తెలపడం నేటి సభ నా ప్రెజెంటేషన్ ఉద్దేశం. సత్యాన్వేషణ పథంలో ఉన్న సాధకులారా, నా తోటి భారతీయులారా, ఈ పిలుపును సార్థకం చేయాలి అనే ఆలోచనతో ప్రతి భారతీయుడు సంకల్పించాలి అన్నదే భారత భాగ్య విధాత భావన అని తెలియజేయడం ఈ సభ ఉద్దేశం. మీకు ముందుగా హ్యాపీ ట్రూ ఇండిపెండెన్స్ డే ఎందుకు అనేటువంటిది కొద్దిసేపట్లో తెలియజేస్తాను. మీ అందరికీ పూర్ణ స్వరాజ్ డిక్లరేషన్ మహాత్మా గాంధీ గారు చేసినటువంటిది, డిక్లరేషన్ ఆఫ్ ఇండియన్ ఇండిపెండెన్స్ 26 జనవరి 1930లో జరిగినటువంటి కాపీలు అన్నీ ఉంటాయి. వాటి గురించి ప్రస్తావన కాసేపట్లో చేస్తాను. భారతీయమైనటువంటి మనము సంవిధానాన్ని ఏర్పాటు చేసుకున్న సందర్భంలో అది ఏ భావనతో చేయబడింది, అందులో ఉన్నటువంటి నిగూఢమైనటువంటి అంశాలు ఎటువంటివి అనేటువంటిది తెలియజేయడం లక్ష్యం. కాబట్టి మొదటగా కాన్స్టిట్యూయెంట్ అసెంబ్లీ డిబేట్స్లో కవర్ పేజ్ మీద ఉన్నటువంటి రాత పూర్వకమైనటువంటి అంశం ఏది అనేటువంటి దాని నుండి మొదలు పెడతాము. The crystal seal of Constituent Assembly of India. This is an excerpt from Sri H. Kumar on the 6th of December 1948. Dharma Chakra Pravartanaya was written on the crest or the seal of the Constituent Assembly of India, and this came in the context of right to religious freedom. There was a mention of this a while ago. Valanarayana garu లౌకికవాదం గురించినటువంటి ఒక మాట ప్రస్తావించారు. దాని గురించిన వివరము చెప్పకుండా ఈ ప్రసంగం సాగడానికి అవకాశం లేదు. అది ఎట్లాగో ఈ ప్రెజెంటేషన్ అంతర్భాగంగానే తెలియజేస్తాను. Dharma, the most comprehensive sense, should be interpreted to mean the true values of religion or the spirit of the spirit. Dharma, which we have adopted in the crest or the seal of our Constituent Assembly, and which you will find on the printed proceedings of our debates, which is Dharma Chakra Pravartanaya. That spirit, sir, to my mind, should be inculcated in the citizens of the Indian Union. If honourable members will care to go just outside the Assembly Hall, the President Parliament Assembly Hall, and look at the dome above, they will see a shloka in Sanskrit. Nasa sabha yatra nasanti vridha nate vridha yena vadanti dharmam. అనగా వృద్ధులు లేనటువంటి దాన్ని సభ అనలేము, ధర్మాన్ని చెప్పలేటువంటి వాడు వృద్ధులు కాదు. ఇది మహాభారతంలో ప్రహ్లాదుడు ఉద్యోగ పదంలో చెప్పినటువంటిది. దాట్ ధర్మ సర్ must be our religion, dharma of which the poet has said, ye nedam dharyate jagat, that by which this world is supported. This was presented when there was a concern about the right to religious propagation, which is granted by the Constitution of India. Why is this important? We'll come to it just in a while. Next slide, please. 25th of November 1949, just a day before the Constitution was adopted, the chairperson of the Drafting Committee, the Honorable Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, was summarizing the entire work that happened then. And he pointed out what was interesting about the way in which Constituent Assembly functioned. And he says, the proceedings of the Constituent Assembly would have been very dull if all members had yielded to the rule of party discipline. By the way, there were 299 members in the Constituent Assembly, most of whom were from the Congress, Indian National Congress. And apart from this, there were members from various provinces which were part of the princely states of those times. Party discipline in all its rigidity would have converted this assembly into a gathering of yes men. Fortunately, they were rebels. They were Mr. Kamath. Mentioned yesterday, H. A. Kamath Garu. He was a disciple and follower of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and one of the youngest members of the Constituent Assembly. And he, in a way, you could say, presented the view of Netaji in the Constituent Assembly. The points they raised were mostly ideological. What was ideological and so on? We Purna Swaraj declaration lo spiritual point gurinchiనటువంటి aspect ఏదైతే ఉందో దాని గురించి చర్చ కాసేపులో చేస్తాను. We'll come to that in a while. While we keep this in mind that these particular points were ideological in nature, yet the Constituent Assembly as a whole accepted that what they were trying to do was to get Dharmachakra Pravartana in the country. What does Dharmachakra Pravartanaya mean is something that we will see in a while. On the same day, Shri Kamaleshwari Prasad Yadav, one of the Constituent Assembly members, he found a shortcoming in the Constitution. And that was, now coming to the shortcoming in the Constitution, the omission of the reference to the father of the nation. All those of you who have gone through the Constitution text would not find a single reference to Mahatma Gandhi, father of the nation. So the text of the Constitution does not indicate who the father of the nation is. Respected Bapu strikes me the most because the entire Constitution began its functioning thanks to the national movement which was heralded by the Mahatma Gandhi, father of the nation. It was Bapu who showed us the way, taught us to walk, molded us to give the lesson of truth and non-violence. He taught us to make sacrifices. It is because of him that we have achieved our freedom, have been able to form this assembly and to prepare the Constitution that we are going to adopt and enforce throughout the country. Really, it is a very pity that we have not made any mention of him in the Constitution. This is our indicator. We do not know how the illustrations have come into the Constitution, the calligraphic edition of the Constitution of India, because there is no written record that says this is how it happened. But from the available public information, this point being raised on the 25th of November 1949, and the next slide please, and the indicator that on the 24th of January 1950, first President of India, he was elected that day, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and the first act of his was the only thing that now remains is the signing of the copy of the Constitution by the members. There are 3 copies ready. One is in English, completely handwritten and illuminated by artists. The second copy is in print in English. The third copy is also handwritten in Hindi. All the 3 copies are laid on the table and members will be requested one by one to come and sign the copies. The idea is to call them in the order in which they are sitting in the house now. But as the Honorable the Prime Minister has to go on public duty, I will request him to first sign them. I am going to show these signatures as well after this presentation. There are 3 copies, and what the country has come to know to a large extent was the second copy, which is in print in English. What was the parity that existed between these 3 copies, all 3 of which are signed by the Constituent Assembly, is an interesting question. When the Hindi translation was made, that was made on the specific reference of Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and he handled the scale in such a way that he did not say that can be called as the official translation. He said, I take the responsibility for this translation, but we as a Constituent Assembly members should sit through and do the same kind of rigorous analysis of the text of that translated Constitution, and then we can say that this is what is the official translation of the Constitution of India. So on that count, Supreme Court of India does not deliver judgments in Hindi. You may not have seen a single judgment that Constitution, that Supreme Court of India gives, which are in Hindi. That's because the Constitution of India that we have, signed by the Constituent Assembly members, was not of the same rigor that you would find that the English text was done. The kind of 3 readings that were done before which it was adopted. So with this on one side, and the reason why I say the translation makes important sense is all the technical terms and what should be the way in which we should translate the technical terms is a serious challenge, and unless a lot of thought is put in, we may not get the accurate meaning that is associated with each of these. So the parity of these 3 is something that is a question which for the moment have removed the point of the Hindi translation. The parity between the calligraphic edition, which is what I am going to show, and that of the English printed copy, what is that and what is its juridical status is what I am going to discuss also through the course of my presentation. Next slide please. On the left side you have Sri Nandlal Bose. Nandlal Bose was this artist who was a disciple of Abanindranath Tagore, and the only artist who Mahatma Gandhi was very comfortable with. You find Prem Bihari Narayan Vaisada Saxena, who is actually writing Calligraphic Edition as the painting itself shows, and he was specially commissioned by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru from Allahabad to come and do this, and this was done in the Parliament House where a special room was granted to him, and this entire writing took place in 6 months. Next slide please. This is the first illustration. The chapter title was Part 1, the Union and its Territory, and here you find the symbol from the seals of Mohenjo-daro, a bull, and the description in the Constitution. There is a legend, and this legend is also something that I am going to circulate today. It says this is decoration with Mohenjo-daro seals, and the period given is Mohenjo-daro period. So, what a bull is a question that we can think in so many times, so many ways. Very particular, మీరు గమనించినట్లయితే వృషభ రాజానికి వచ్చినటువంటి ప్రస్తుత పరిస్థితి ఏమిటి అనేటువంటి ఒక ఘటన ఉంటుంది. అది తప్పకుండా చదవాల్సింది. ఈరోజు జల్లికట్టు గురించి దేశవ్యాప్తంగా జరుగుతున్నటువంటి చర్చ ఏమిటి అనేటువంటిది వృషభ రాజం అనేటువంటి మనకున్నటువంటి మొదటి ఇలస్ట్రేషన్ అనేటువంటి ఆలోచన కూడా పెట్టుకొని చదవడం అనేటువంటి చాలా అవసరమైనటువంటిది. అది యూనియన్ అండ్ ఇట్స్ టెరిటరీ అనేటువంటి పార్ట్ మీద వచ్చింది కాబట్టి షుడ్ బి కన్సిడర్ దట్ ది యూనియన్ షుడ్ బి యాజ్ స్ట్రాంగ్ యాజ్ ది బుల్ is a question to ponder. Next slide please. This is the second illustration, and the period suggested is Vedic period, and the part 2 is citizenship. Description is the scene from Vedic ashram or the Gurukul. So, who should be citizens? It is only those who are well educated. So, students to citizens. Is that the direction given? Is a question to ponder. Next slide please. This is the third illustration, and part 3 is fundamental rights, the epic period. There are 2 such illustrations of the epic period, because the 2 epics that we know, one is Ramayana and the other is Mahabharata. So the description of the Constitution says this is a scene from the Ramayana, conquest of Lanka and recovery of Sita by Rama. Since it is in the part 3 fundamental rights, should we possibly ask, is it steadfastness in upholding rights that it is referring to? Next slide please. Epic period part 4, directive principles of state policy. Description of the Constitution is seen from the Mahabharata. Sri Krishna propounding Gita to Arjuna. Is it the appropriate direction to the state? Because it is directive principles of state policy. Sri Krishna instructing Arjuna. Next slide please. Fifth one belongs to Mahajanpada and Nanda period. Part 5 is about the union, what constitutes the union. Description is the scene from Buddha's life. This is the first sermon given at Mrugavana, Isipatna, Sarnath, Dhammachakra Pavartana Sutta. Dhammachakra Pavartanaya is what was written, and Dhammachakra Pavartana Sutta is something which most of you would be aware of. That is where the 4 noble truths were conveyed by Lord Buddha to his first initial 5 disciples. In this union, was it to set the wheel of dharma in motion? That's the question to ponder. Next slide please. There's another thing from the Mahajanapada and Nanda period. Part 6 is the states in part A of the first schedule. Description says scene from Mahavira's life. Please notice that there are two, say, huge leaf-like structures. They are Sala Vrikshas. So this is the scene which says attain Keval Jnana under a Sala tree. One takes Jainism proper. The highest state attained by a Jain is a state of Jina who possesses Kevala Jnana. Kevala Jnana, in other words, when approximately translated, is omniscience. Kevala Jnana under Sala tree. Next slide, please. Modern period, part 7, the states, the part B of this first schedule. Please notice that the first time when the constitution was adopted, we didn't have states and union territories, but instead we had part A states, part B states, part C states, part D states, and other territories. All these, after the first states reorganization, that was when the states and union territories were formed. The story behind it and why each of these states and part B have different kinds of rules, that has got to do with the kind of way in which they were brought within the union. The manner in which the negotiations took place between various princely states and the way in which they have accepted the Indian Union, all that got reflected in the way in which these details are present. Which current constitution, after the privy purses and the special privileges accorded to the princely states and the princes were removed by Srimati Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister, in 1970, they do not find place in our current constitution. So the scene here is the spread of Buddhism by Emperor Ashoka in India and abroad. So there is a role for state in the spreading of Dhamma, which is necessarily a part of the agenda of the Next slide, please. This is from the Mauryan period. Gupta period, attested by the modern Indian historians as the Golden Age, has 3 different paintings, and this is where the focus on the art and architecture of the times is brought to the fore through these paintings. As a matter of fact, architecture plays a major role in constituting the imaginations of people. You take the case of Tanjavur Brihadishwara temple. That installation there defined the entire Cholan Empire. Similarly, all the monumental art that exists in the country has definitely got a constitutional character in it. It gives shape to the imagination of people as to the direction in which the polity should be understood. This is a fundamental point of the nature of the polity. This is a scene from Gupta art, its development in different phases. You could notice the architectural blocks. And this is a painting of a yaksha, and there is also a matter of flying in the air, and there's, if you look at behind, there is a chariot behind. The details of these could as well be analyzed for various ways. Next slide, please. Again, from the Gupta period, and if you notice this carefully, this is a scene from the Vikramaditya's court, and the part 9, the chapter is titled The Territories in Part B of the First Schedule and Other Territories Not Specified in that Schedule. This is a scene from Vikramaditya's court, and since it is a golden age as per historians, if you notice there is a deer there. Imagine the deer from the Adhyastakasana, Kalidasa's play, that could as well be seen and as depicted in this painting. Next slide, please. This is Gupta period again, and there is a pride of place given to education as part of the constitution. And Nalanda University, there is actually the name written very clearly on the other side in the painting, the left side image. Part 10 is the scheduled and tribal areas, and the description of the constitution is a scene depicting one of the ancient universities, Nalanda. So the repeated occurrence of learning that you would notice is something that should not be missed insofar as the constitution and its imagination is concerned. Next slide, please. This is a scene from the beautiful sculptures from Orissa. You've been to Konark, Puri, Bhubaneswar. Some of the best sculptures that India has seen are found there. This is part 11. During the medieval period, the utilization between union and the states. This is what is the presence. Next slide, please. Again, from the medieval period, the part 12 is on finance, property, contracts and suits. And it's an image of Nataraja which has an interesting, say, anti-clockwise swastika. Current imagination of anti-clockwise swastika is limited to thinking that this is a Nazi symbol. But if you look at the Silpa Shastra, and I'm sure, say, Dr. Shivnagiri would know this, the sense of anti-clockwise swastika and clockwise swastika have different meanings. Whereas the clockwise swastika is said to speak of a stable world, the anti-clockwise swastika is about the dynamic nature of the world. In a sense, finance, property, contracts and suits are all very dynamic. So the dynamic sense is balanced by the Natya of Nataraja. Next slide please. Again from the medieval period, this is the famous mural, probably the largest mural, that single stone mural that you would find in the entire world from Mahabalipuram, wherein a part of it is taken. And this is part of the chapter title is Trade, Commerce and Intercourse within the Territory of India. And the description of the constitution given to this painting is a scene from Mahabalipuram sculptures, Bhagirath's penance in the descent of Ganga. ఈ రోజు కనుక మనం దీని గురించి తిరిగి ఆలోచన చేయాలంటే గంగా నది అలాగే నదులన్నింటినీ కూడా దాట్ విచ్ ఫ్లోస్ ఇస్ రివర్ అనే సెన్స్ లో చూడాలంటే in order to ensure that our rivers have to be protected and be called rivers properly, భగీరథ ప్రయత్నం తప్పకుండా చేయాల్సిన అవసరం ఉంది అని చెప్పి గుర్తు చేసుకోలేము. Strength of resolve and unwavering effort is what is actually something to be taken from this. Next slide please. 14th is called the Muslim period, and the defining image there is that of a portrait of Akbar with Mughal architecture. Please notice the importance given to arts, architecture through these illustrations. I have just given you a mention about the constitutional character of architecture in the country. This is true in any place in the world, and you would be aware that if you think of America, the Statue of Liberty comes to the mind. And similarly, what would be that architecture that comes to mind when one thinks of India is a point to be quoted on. Part 14 is called Services under the Union and States. The description is portrayed with Mughal architecture, and possibly you find some elements of Fatehpur Sikri there. Next slide please. This is again from Muslim period. And part 15 is on the elections, where election commission and details are given. The description of the constitution is portraits of Shivaji and Guru Gobind Singh. Now there is a serious question which I am going to circulate about what is the nature of periodization that is done in terms of the presentation of these images and illustrations.
That's exactly what I would like to read.
Which requires to be understood and also followed.
You should not put it as Muslim.
Well, let us first understand and then we will ask the questions and so on. So the nature of periodization is a point to be quoted on. And the description, as you see, so on one side you have Shivaji, and the other side you have Guru Gobind Singh. Next slide please. This is called the British period, part 16, and these are special provisions relating to certain classes. And the description of the constitution is portraits of Tipu Sultan and Lakshmi Bai. It's the rise against the British conquest. And if you notice, say, the newspapers recently, for the past 1 year or so, there is a huge controversy in Karnataka about whether should there be Tipu Jayanti celebrated or not. If these images are present in the constitution signed by the Constituent Assembly, there should not be any problem raised by anyone for Tipu Jayanti to be celebrated, because Tipu is also part of this imagination presented within the constitution. But this statement of mine would hold true only if the parity exists between the first signed constitution, which is the Calligraphic Edition, and the second one, which is only the English text. Please keep this in mind. Next slide, please. Now, this is probably the most important painting, and I have given you the reference to Kamaleshwari Prasad Yadav's urge that there should be some way or the other that Mahatma Gandhi, in whose name this entire process happened, is to be understood, is to be as well spoken of. And this is in the part 17 official language, and it is this portrait which was made by Nandlal Bose, which made him very famous and also known to Mahatma Gandhi. This was done in 1930 itself, when the first steps towards Purna Swaraj were taken, and the circulated Purna Swaraj Declaration has a specific section which speaks about 3% tax on salt and the burden that it actually had on the poorest of the poor in the country. And you would find that the thought process of how to plan the first move of civil disobedience was already there while the declaration was being made, and after 4 months of churning, at the right moment, you would also find the date there, 12th of April 1930, which was when Gandhi March began. And that's the steps to Purna Swaraj. India's freedom movement. And the next slide, please. As a continuation of the India's freedom movement, this is probably the hallmark of the strength of soul force, Satyagraha. This is the remarkable instance. It's from the part, say, 18 emergency provisions. That's the title. Description given is Bapuji the Peacemaker is stored in the riot-affected areas of Noakhali. Noakhali is in Bengal. In 1946, there were severe rioting on both east and west side of what we today call as Bangladesh and Pakistan, West Punjab, as well as East Bengal. And at that time, the Governor General and also Lord Mountbatten, who was as well holding fort, he had troops only to send on one side, and he didn't know what to do on the other side. He sent the troops towards the west, and there was a one-man army sent to the east, and that was Mahatma Gandhi. He succeeded, whereas the forceful use of troops on the west did not succeed, and that is the power of soul force. Since it is in emergency provisions, possibly the power of soul force in emergency must be recognized. That's probably something that we could as well say good on. Next slide, please. Now this is the second most important painting that you will locate. That's because it was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose who called Mahatma Gandhi as the father of our nation for the first time. It was an epithet given to Mahatma Gandhi by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And the words, I'm not sure if you can read it, it says, Mahatma Ji, father of our nation, in this holy war for India's liberation, we ask for your blessings. Good wishes, Netaji. That's the painting. So you have two instances in this constitution where father of our nation is very clearly specified, one as an illustration and one as a description of the illustration. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and other patriots trying to liberate Mother India from outside India. That's the 19th illustration. Now comes a switch which is very equally important towards imagination of Indian polity. భారతవాది రాజు అనేటువంటి వాడు ప్రజలకు మాత్రమే రాజు కాదు, అక్కడ ఉన్నటువంటి ప్రకృతిలో ఉన్నటువంటి ప్రతి ఒక్కరికి రాజు అనేటువంటిది మర్చిపోరాలి. నెక్స్ట్ స్లైడ్ ప్లీజ్. This in some sense is also an imagination of the nature of space that is present within the constitution. There are natural features. Part 20 is the amendment of the constitution, and the description is the scene of the Himalayas. The moment you imagine Himalayas, what all you can go in can also be read into that. Next slide please. The natural features again. Part 21 says temporary and transitional provisions. The description of the constitution is scene of the desert. Next slide please. This is the final painting. Part 22 is short title, commencement and appeals. The description is the scene of the ocean. These are the 22 illustrations done by Nandlal Bose after the calligraphic edition was made. And once the calligraphic edition page was done, it was given over to these illustrators, Nandlal Bose and Vijayawada Ramanohar Sinha. If you look at the colorful preamble, which is decorated part, which you may have seen many times, that was done by Ramanohar Sinha. And at one corner, you would also find the signature, small words written as Ram. If you observe it carefully, I'll probably show that to you in a while. Next slide, please. Now, let me show a different imagination as to how we can look at this thing. There was a reason why, say, we shifted this this presentation from 26th of January 2017 to 25th of January, and this is that imagination. 26th of January 1930, the Common Era, according to Telugu Panchanga, the Tithi was Pushya Krishna Dwadasi until 4:59:15 seconds. Vara was Ravivara, Nakshatra was Mula. Again, Tithivara Nakshatra, according to current time, right now, is Pushya Krishna Trayodasi. After Dwadasi 4:59, it was Trayodasi then. Now it is Trayodasi. Vara Budha, Nakshatra Mula. Happy to Independence Day. Next slide, please. What is the Constitution? A question to deeply ponder. Is it just the text and the illustrations? Something more? What constitutes a nation? And finally, what is the juridical status of these illustrations? Next slide, please. This is an important judgment into one of the most controversial events of the past 60 years. On the 1st of January 1993, which normally is a court holiday, there was a special court hearing, and this was in a case called Vishwa Hindu Adhivakta Sangh versus Union of India and others. The judgment was delivered, and the plea there was, there are these installed or present idols of Ramlala, that is the Lord Rama in his, say, infant form. There should be performance of puja to this Lord Ram, which was the plea made to the court. That kindly give us permission to do puja there. And when this was put in front of the court then gave a very, probably say, unimagined kind of judgment. And that judgment, part of it I am actually reading out. Para 51 says, in fact, this is probably the only judgment where the illustrations that you have just seen have been used by a judge to give a judgment, to deliver a judgment. The moment this is part of the case law, the entire illustrations have now got a juridical force. The depiction of various portraits and various pages of the Constitution while adopting it on the 26th of November 1949, the Constituent Assembly expressed itself that these are the national and nationally recognized phases and features of our national life, our heritage, our culture, and the source of inspiration for adopting the concept of secularism. It's unfortunate that we don't have golden narrator here. This is a description which requires to be seriously brooded on, and this also poses a very serious challenge for celebration. I just raised that a while. For this judgment, there was also a special leave petition filed against this, and this was summarily dismissed by the Supreme Court of India. And afterwards, the government enacted an ordinance on 7th of January 1993, the sole object of which was to permanently establish and legitimize the makeshift Ram Mandir, because it was granted permission to do puja there. And when this ordinance, which later became an act, was challenged in the Supreme Court, the majority judges, it was a judgment of Justice J. Verma, it upheld this very provision in the law under Section 7, which sought to maintain the status quo as of January 7th, 1993. So if you happen to see Constitution, the election manifestos of Indian National Congress, with respect to Ayodhya, they will have a point that the status quo as on January 7, 1993 is what they intend to as well maintain. If you look at the details, etc.
For my clarification,
yes, sir.
The first paragraph about Vishwa Hindu, and then the second quotation, which speaks about the various portraits. I didn't understand why your club.
So the point is that in that judgment,
for
the first time, Vishwa Hindu Adhivakta Sangh versus Union of India and others has cited that judge. His name is Justice H R Tilhari. I was fortunate to go and meet him and ask what made him do this. So he said that in his childhood, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru gifted him a copy of the initially made photolithograph editions of calligraphic editions of the Constitution of India. So he possessed a copy of that, which was unknown to many other judges.
Okay.
So because he had this in his possession, and there is a copy of the same thing which you would find in the Parliament library also, he said, in fact I didn't put it here, he mentioned that insofar as, say, whether historically there existed Ram or not, there existed Krishna or not, there existed Buddha or not, these are not questions at all insofar as Indian constitution is concerned, because in these illustrations he states that they are to be treated as nationally recognized pieces. The moment you do that, there is a sense that the courts take where there are some things which are taken as self-evident truths. So it's a matter of fact that it's a post fact. Whether it is true or not is immediate.
How is it relating to Ram Janmabhoomi? These calligraphic editions will contain all these depictions.
That's because, and that was about, I was about to state that. He said that because Ram is part of this.
Part of what? Part of what?
Part of the sequence of these paintings. You found, say, a scene from Ramayana.
Okay. So
where there is mention of Ram, Lakshman and Sita, and the conquest of Ram.
So what is his argument then?
The argument given was the presence of Ram there is an indicator that he is true and important national figure, somebody who needs to be looked up to as per the Constituent Assembly imagination.
Okay.
And because of which a plea such as made here cannot be disallowed.
Okay, it is depicted there in the Constitution.
That's right.
So how does it come for the Ram Janmabhoomi's pujas?
The question was how he constructed the argument. I can give you the...
No, I understood. By what strength he is quoting this constitutional calligraphic picture to say I will perform pujas?
So that's a question.
It's totally ditching. There is an issue of conflict. Archaeologically, there is a conflict. Whether it is Ram Janmabhoomi or something else.
That's right.
So taking this calligraphic edition of the Constitution, you mentioned Rama is a naturally inhabited or accepted phenomenon. So also you have to perform a puja there. You are not allowing the performance of puja there, not because you don't consider Rama as a god of this country, but because that's a point of conflict there.
So, in a sense, the detail of this is something that I certainly, it's not my objective to defend or offend this court judgment. The only point that I want to point out here is that the way in which the judge went about his argumentation gave a completely different meaning to the way in which this has to be read. That's the first point that I certainly want you to note. Insofar as, say, the other ways of imagination are concerned, they are all something which are things which we have to celebrate on. As long as there is a very intelligent and thinking citizenry, we are going to see much better ways in which we can articulate how our own country is to be understood. And insofar as judges are concerned,
that was a High Court judgment.
That's right, sir. It's the Allahabad High Court judgment of the Lucknow bench, which was challenged and it was summarily dismissed, and then there was an ordinance and the ordinance became an act that was challenged, and that was also something which was accepted, and that is the Ismail Faruqi versus Union of India case of 1994.
So the act has been accepted?
The act has been accepted, which is one reason that that's something which requires to be seriously understood. And if you happen to listen to, say, the current Ayodhya case and so on, there will be a reference to this repeatedly made by whoever are the advocates that are there, who are presenting and arguing for the construction of Ram Temple in Ayodhya. So that is one side.
So when the provision is, when the Supreme Court has given order that construction of Ram Mandir can go ahead as per the Act.
They didn't say that. All that they said is status quo as on 7th January 1993, where there is a makeshift temple. So even today, if you happen to go to Ayodhya, I was there in Ayodhya just to see what was going on there. You have a completely barricaded atmosphere in which you pass through after at least a series of checks. security checks. Once you go there, at a distance, under a tree, you find a pandal. That's a kind of makeshift arrangement. And there, you may or may not get to see the idol of Ramalla. There will be a pujari who comes, crisscrosses. Whoever go there, he comes and gives you what is it, prasad or kumkum, etc., etc. So this is the state of affairs right now. If you go to Ayodhya, this is what you experience.
No, sir. The point is,
yes, sir.
Archaeologically, historically, you cannot just decide whether it is a Rama Janmabhoomi or something else.
It was not a point of Rama Janmabhoomi at all. It was a point of there are idols present there, and these idols, whether it is Rama Janmabhoomi or not, is not a question which is being dealt by the court. The court's question was, kindly give us permission to perform the puja to the idols which are currently present, because we do not know when you are going to be deciding whether there is a Rama Janmabhoomi or not. For so long, till you decide, how can you leave the idols without any puja? Kindly give us permission, grant us permission. That was the plea.
So, Allahabad High Court agreed to that.
Allahabad High Court agreed. But generally, if you notice the nature of constitutions, every time a judge writes a judgment, he is rewriting the constitution. An intelligent judge can as well interpret the constitution, and by the way of interpretation, he is going to add more meaning or as well say alter the way in which the constitution is understood.
A maturity of that.
So it is dependent on the nature of the judge that is involved, and the judge here has, in his wisdom, stated these things. And there are there say other judges who oppose this in the public? Answer is yes. While this may be on one side, it is interesting to note that only in a very peculiar case like this, that it occurred to a judge to as well brush that which was forgotten for so many years, because there were 2 copies of the constitution which were signed, both of which were English, which means both of which were critically scrutinized by the members of the Constituent Assembly, because the content in English that they contained was the same.
They only signed on the last page?
No.
Not
on the last page, but starting from the Schedule 8, which listed language. I am going to show those in
my point is, did they sign on the illustrated pages?
All the pages were illustrated. So at the end of the illustration, these signatures were there. And as I pointed to you in the statement made by the President, it was clearly stated that here are 3 copies and one is with illustrations. So the notion of illustration was also made known to the Constituent Assembly members.
And did they write at the top that this constitution is written in English?
It is known to everybody that it was in English.
No. It's a legal issue I am asking.
Yes.
In the constitution, anywhere they have written, or in the beginning, that we hereby write this constitution in English. Then nobody can interpret the pictures, because pictures have no meaning. If they are not interpreted, then whatever language, even picture is a language.
That's right. So, in fact, you would find several references to language, and the language question, as far as the constitution is concerned, they left it open.
Constitution రాసేటప్పుడు we are writing this constitution in English. అన్నప్పుడు ఓన్లీ ఇంగ్లీష్లో రాసిందే we have to interpret. దాని మధ్యలో హిందీలో రాసింది లేకపోతే బొమ్మలు గీసింది ఇంటర్ప్రిట్ చేయడానికి వీల్లేదు. అదే హిందీలో రాశాడు అనుకోండి, హిందీలో రాసి మధ్యలో ఇంగ్లీష్లో ఎక్కడన్నా రాస్తే అది ఇంటర్ప్రిట్ చేయడానికి వీల్లేదు. ఇప్పుడు ఆ విధంగా ఇంటర్ప్రిట్ చేయాలంటే ఆ పక్కన బోర్డర్స్ వేసాడు కదా, ఆ బోర్డర్ తెలుగులో ఉన్నట్టు ఉందనుకోండి, ఇది తెలుగులో కూడా రాశాడు అంటారు.
సో అక్కడ the entire strength of say the imagination of the judge comes to the play.
No, I agree.
If at all the judge reads that way, then that's where say you find that the judge is trying to create.
No, ఇప్పుడు జడ్జి గురించి అడగట్లా నేను, as an expert on constitution I am asking you,
right?
In the beginning of the constitution or somewhere, did they write that this is written in English and రాశారా?
No.
రాయకపోతే he has the right to interpret as he wants.
Otherwise this cannot be in law. I am saying that this is a part of law today.
And that's what I am trying to explain.
First point I am clarifying is that this is a part of law today. Let us get this clear in the first place.
The law.
This is part of law because it is a case law.
Important.
Okay, so that is one part. So legally speaking, say there is that which cannot be denied.
So if the Constitution doesn't say it is written in English, some language it is written, and that there are two languages used. One is English, the other one is Hilographic.
Hindi.
No, in the same Constitution I am saying, the side Constitution law, Hilography or Hilography are both.
Okay.
It is also a type of language.
Alright. Unless and until we are clear about what these patterns are. So I
am supporting you. I am supporting this.
No, it's not a question of supporting.
No, I am just saying, I am not arguing with you. I am just wanted to know some information.
I like the idea, but I have not thought in these lines because if you carefully observe the decorations which are there on the borders of these illustrated pages, they are all taken from the murals in Ajanta and the other places of cave paintings which are there in the country. Because Sri Nandalal Bose was one of the say persons who has scrutinized and studied the Ajanta caves very carefully. And the patterns which are used, they are actually taken from there. And if suppose there is a creative imagination that comes to play, where somebody says that the way in which this has to be related to the Buddhist caves which are there in Ajanta, it must be read in the light of, say, Buddhist Pali texts, then you are going to add more value to it. So similarly, if I am saying there is a reference to Ramayana and Mahabharata there, if there is a very seriously creative judge which is there, he could also say that the entire text of Ramayana, entire text of Mahabharata, entire text of the Dhammachakkar Pravana Sutta, they are all said to be part and parcels of. And in fact, insofar as any sense of constitution is concerned, what is constitutive principles that are actually present in terms of formulating a constitution cannot categorically state that what we have in the past is something that we erase.
I have 2-3 other questions also.
Yes.
So, what you said, any other time before Ledanaro, after that again they refer to these illustrations and given judgment?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. And
in fact, the invocation of this is necessary. For example, రీసెంట్గా మీకు సంతార సల్లేఖన అనేటువంటి ఒక కేసు జరిగింది. సంతార సల్లేఖన అనేటువంటిది ప్రత్యేకంగా జైనుల్లో ఉన్నటువంటి ఒక పద్ధతి. ఏమిటి అంటే ఎవరైనా సరే జైనులు వాళ్ళ యొక్క నమ్మకం ప్రకారం నా జీవితంలో నేను సాధించదలుచుకుంది మొత్తం పూర్తిగా అయిపోయింది అన్న భావంతో ఇక నేను జీవించే ఉపయోగం లేదు, నా జీవితం అనేటువంటిది ఇక నేను ప్రాణత్యాగం చేయడానికి సిద్ధపడ్డాను. సో ప్రాణత్యాగం చేయడానికి సిద్ధపడ్డాను వాళ్ళకు పద్ధతి ఉంది. ఏ పద్ధతి? వాళ్ళ గురువు గారు ఒక దీక్ష పడి ఆ దీక్ష కాస్త చేయడానికి వాడు అంతకుముందు ఎన్నో స్టెప్స్ అయిన తర్వాత వాళ్ళ దీక్ష లభించిన తర్వాత వాళ్ళు అక్కడి నుండి ఇక తిన్న మానేస్తారు. సో దే స్టాప్ themselves to death in terms of very crude language. యాక్చువల్లీ వాళ్ళ భాషలో వాళ్ళు దానికి ఉదాత్తమైనటువంటి భావన వ్యక్తీకరణ చేస్తారు. ఏ సందర్భంలో అయినా సరే భారతీయమైనటువంటి మన భావనలు, మనకు సంబంధించినటువంటి ఆచారాలు, వ్యవహారాలు, వీటికి సంబంధించినటువంటి జడ్జ్మెంట్స్, if they are to be given by considering all the depth of meaning that is associated with them, that certainly calls for this kind of interpretation, which means it is the bounden duty of the judge. Because within the Constitution there are several references where seat of justice is a seat of God. So a person who is a judge, who is actually sitting on the position of being a judge, he has a responsibility to make sure that he is in complete authority and control of all the details of the case concerned that he is handling. ఆ స్పష్టత లేనటువంటి వాడు ఒకవేళ జడ్జ్మెంట్ ఇచ్చినట్లయితే కనుక most of us will only find more troubles with it, and it cannot be called a judgment which is actually resulted in terms of some good. And on another note, it's an interesting point to note that Supreme Court of India has a motto, Yato Dharmas Tato Jayah. It's a very challenging question, which is my research topic as well. How do you understand the judgments of Supreme Court of India in the light of their motto? I'm still trying to say, locate certain kind of, you could say, sample cases which can be seen as the way in which they have gone about this task. And there say, either they are giving a different meaning to dharma, or in the light of the various notions of dharma that are actually indicated. Ramudu Nadu, Vaidika Gurukulam Undi, Krishnudu Nadu, Buddhudu Nadu, Mahavirudu Nadu. Annitlo kuda dharma అనేటువంటి మాట వాడబడింది. So the volume of this word is not something just small. How do we understand this volume is a serious challenge that we have to brood over. I just
I have two more questions. Yeah, just two questions and illustrations on a constitution in various countries.
Not that I know of. Seriously, there are calligraphic editions available. You will find Russian calligraphic edition based work. Persian world, in fact, they were originators of calligraphy. You do find, say, calligraphic editions there. But I do not think there are illustrations of this kind. And probably one of the first speeches, in terms of that, I am also going to show in a while. Next slide. I'll just answer that, sir. This is Dr. Sachidananda Sinha, who was the first president of the Constituent Assembly because he was the senior most member. On the final day when the Constitution was being adopted, he was not healthy. So he sent a message which was read out by the President of Constituent Assembly, Dr. Rajendra. And what was that? If permissible, kindly convey Assembly my message. Though privileged to inaugurate as first president its proceedings in December 1946, but not to take part in their closing tomorrow due to continued ill health, I have, with keenest interest and deepest sympathy, followed the work of constitution making and remembering that nothing in this world is or can be perfect. I repeat, nothing in this world is or can be perfect or please all. And also the patent facts that the area to be covered was tremendous, the population multitudinous of hundreds of millions with multiplicity of languages and conflicts of vast and varied interests. It is not at all surprising that there are several problems unsolved. But to me, it is marvelous that so much unity and integrity should have been evolved in almost all matters, reflecting thereby highest credit on the good sense of the assembly. And no less redounding to you as highly tactful president. As a senior most member of the assembly, I invoke divine mercy that your labors may be crowned with fullest success and that the ancient historic land of Bharat may again stand forth great and glorious in the scale of nations. Please underline the words ancient historic land of Bharat. The sense is something where there is a memory which is also at play and that we find repeatedly being reflected. So there is no sense where you can say that we are going to reject our past. How do we carry our past and at the same time find a new way? That is a challenge that requires to be addressed.
But here the damage, he said the ancient historic land of Bharat doesn't include South India. That's only Gangetic Plain. He kicked us out.
I am not too sure if Bharat is understood that way.
One point.
I'll tell you sir, what Bharat means, and I have an entire book exclusively on that, which actually details, say, in what sense Bharat is used, and tracing the historical version as well as the context in which you would consider. సంవత్సరాల ప్రకారం ఏది ఆర్యవర్తం అవ్వాలి, ఏది భారతం అవ్వాలి అనేందుకు అక్కడ ఎటువంటి రాజ్యం పాలన ఉంది అనేటువంటిది ప్రధానమైంది. It is as well as say if you are going to speak of Dakshina Ganga, there is an imagery of space, a geography, where you are going to find, say, a replication of it, not just at one place, because it's all there in the mind. Now you are going to say, go to a place and call it Dakshina Kashi, Dakshina Ganga. These are all certain conceptual frameworks of how do you see space. Next slide, please.
But here I would like to add one thing.
Yes, sir.
Ashoka, he is the only one emperor who has ruled the vast tracts of land, even the Indian archipelago beyond the other area. One thing. He mentioned in his inscriptions Jambudvipa, not Bharat, nothing. That is only Jambudvipa. It continued up to 12th century. The same Jambudvipa.
fact, that actually is a very important question. I have a book with me which I can share with you, probably the only work on this kind. It's called Desh Ke Abhidhan. It's a Hindi work by Professor Vishwambharan Pathak, who was a student of Professor A.L. Basham, and a very senior and remarkable scholar of Sanskrit, Pali and Prakrit, but not much is known of him. This book, he says, is something which discusses Bharat, Hindu, Hindustan, India, ke nirukti.
Allahabad judge referred to the paintings there, saying they are part of constitution. Now, 6 will say, we will ask for Khalistan because our picture is not there in constitution. We are not part of India.
Guru Gobind Singh Where is there? Guru Gobind Singh is part of the paintings.
Shivaji.
Guru Gobind Singh is part of the paintings.
Shivaji.
Mughal Muslim periodization discussion.
Point.
Yes, sir.
అక్కడ మీరు 14 అంటే 14 నెంబర్ వేసి రోమను ఇదేసి ఒక చోట 15, 16 ముస్లిం అన్నారే అది కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ దాని మీద ఉందా?
నేను అవే చెప్తున్నాను.
1 minute సార్, మీరు చెప్పడం కాదు,
అది
ముస్లిం అనే వర్డ్ వాడింది అక్కడ.
ఎవరన్నా చెప్పారు ఇలిస్ట్రేట్ చేయమని సరదాగా తీశారు. అసలు ఎందుకు బాగుంది?
దిస్ వన్ is it exactly there or you have brought it or what?
Please give this copy.
Page numbers కూడా ఇచ్చారు.
గురు గోవింద్ సింగ్ ఎక్కడ ఉన్నాడంటే
పక్కనండి గురు గోవింద్ సింగ్ అని మీకు అక్కడ మీకు ఈ బర్డ్ చూసారా వెనకాల? సో దాని నుంచి తెలిసిందనమాట.
లేదు మీరు అంటున్నారు అది శివాజీ అని కూడా నాకు అనిపించలా.
మీకు అనిపిస్తున్నాడు. దిస్ ఇస్ ద డిస్క్రిప్షన్ విత్ ఇన్ కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్.
ఓ రాసుందా?
పక్కన ఈ నోట్ తీసుకోండి.
రాసుంటే పర్లేదు.
అన్ని రాసున్నాయి సార్.
ఎందుకంటే అతను శివాజీ అసలు
now and today Indian historians does not use the term periodization.
I know, which is why
very dangerous.
I've given you Islamic.
Not even this one. We have to call it medieval.
I know.
Should not call. If we call it Muslim, we may have to say ancient Hindu. And we should not call it British, we should call it Christian.
I'm sorry, we may not even call Hindu because Hindu was not a term.
No, I am saying we have to call it, which is dangerous. That's the reason why communism took place. Muslim League emerged because of that.
Like, so whether it is dangerous or not, we just discuss in a while. I just want to say that these things to be opened up for, say, reflection.
See, that's the reason why, because of the periodization of history as the ancient Hindu, medieval Muslim and like that, the Muslim League emerged. Congress will be joined.
కాదండి ఏదన్నా అవనీది కానీ ఈ బొమ్మలు గీయటం ఏంటో ఎవరు చెప్పారు ఐడియా? వీళ్ళు కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ లో
I have just given you a response to that. I said Kamleshwari Prasad Yadav raised a point. And in between, say, 25th of November 1949 and 24th of January 1950, it took 6 months for the calligraphic edition to be made. 6 months so, it was 395 articles covered. Calligraphy itself took a lot of time. Then tarvata calligraphy pages evaitunayo andro decorations, border decorations ani pages unnayi, which is something that can be done once the design is decided. But to have specific images made is a much more tougher task. So that was taken up, in my estimate, between 25th of November 1949 and 24th of January 1950. That was when these things were being spoken of.
When was the constitution passed by the Constitutional Assembly?
26th of November 1949.
So it is
adopted. Promulgated is a different story. Adoption is different from promulgation. Promulgation is when it comes to effect.
President has to sign and all that.
First, Constituent Assembly members should sign, which is why I have given you when was it signed and the day when, say, the President called people to sign one after another.
On 24th.
On the 24th of January 1950. The unfinished agenda is something that requires to be understood because the entire exercise of the Constitution, every Constituent Assembly member was aware that their knowledge was limited. They were very humble. they also knew that what we did is probably the best that we could do given our knowledge. Once we keep this in mind, that is why they also allowed for probably the easiest way in which amendments could also be made. The number of amendments that were made to Indian Constitution is not normally expected to all the constitutions. So much so that a famous judge once remarked, the problem with the Constitution is not outside of the Constitution, it is within the Constitution, and that is because of its free ability to amend the Constitution. It's only later that, say, the rigidity towards amending was actually, say, ensured by way of certain kinds of aspects where the court intervened, saying that you can, say, amend, but there should be a basic structure that cannot be amended. Another interesting point is nobody defined what this basic structure is. They only broadly said these are things which are going to be part of the.
Sir, Vasishta ji, what I understand, the historians of the times of the 1950s are not matured enough, comprehensively put all the regional, linguistic, regional, and all other kinds of India's diversities into the pictographic representation.
True. Which is why
that's the reason why the conflict now.
Which is why we find that most of the, say, constitutional challenges that India has faced, including that of including that of the division of Andhra Pradesh into Telangana and Andhra Pradesh currently, has got to do with the way in which the schedules and the manner of imagination that you find in Article 371 as well as the Constitution as a whole. If we accept that India is a constitutional polity, all the kind of problems that we face must be traced its roots within the Constitution. And that is why celebrating on this is very important. Celebrating. And I am using it consciously because when you celebrate, it's not just a matter of reflection. After reflecting, you also are to make a call for yourself as to what standpoint you take and defend your standpoint. It is with that conviction when every citizen, I began this presentation by calling every person, every Indian, every Bharatiya as a person who is a seeker of truth. I intend to as well present this thing categorically that if India is a fraternity, it is a fraternity of seekers of truth. And this is the place where we have the greatest scope for imagining what should be the kind of confluence of all the diversity that we get to see. And I want to give one example of this just to challenge the imagination. Next slide, please. Grounds on which any imagination begins. First one is to think of what is the nature of time. And the timeline that is given in this is a fascinating one, because it takes what is historical time into picture. But the sense of ethics and the Puranas and the timeline there and the imagination of time that we find in Buddhism, Jainism, or in Sikhism, all these are different. So if at all we are to come up with a coherent account, then one must be philosophically clear about what timeline we pick and in what context we are actually going to do. And if there are multiplicity of them, how do we harmonize each of these? That's the first challenge. Second point, what is the nature of space that is imagined in this? We found natural features specified. There are several natural features which are not specified as well. If at all we are to imagine what constitutes this nation, which constituting taken as an English word, which elements form part of the constitution, that is something which is a matter of imagination. And that is something which should be an ongoing process. Because as seekers of truth, our attempts towards engaging in this quest is going to help us. The question of language is the third one. In fact, number of Indian terms which have great depth of philosophical meaning have been ill-translated to English, because of which we have lost great degree of meaning. and with that correspondingly the nature of our imaginations and context of how our thoughts are and the contours of thought that develop, they are being hijacked. So a recovery of that language is equally important. Now, one key aspect to notice is an earlier polity existed which spoke of Raja-Praja relation. రాజు తండ్రి వంటి వాడు, ప్రజలు పిల్లల వంటి వాడు అనేటువంటి ఊహకి స్టేట్ సిటిజన్ రిలేషన్కి చాలా తేడా ఉంది. స్టేట్ అనేటువంటిది రాజ్యము అనేటువంటి అర్థంలో మనం తర్జుమా చేసుకున్నా నష్టం లేదు. సిటిజన్ అనేటువంటి దాన్ని ఏమని చేయాలి? సిటిజన్ అనేటువంటిది గ్రీక్ నోషన్ ఆఫ్ సిటీ స్టేట్స్ లో ఉండేటువంటి వ్యక్తి, ఎవరికైతే కొన్ని అధికారాలు ఇవ్వబడ్డాయో, ఎవరికైతే ఓటు హక్కులు ఉన్నాయో వాళ్ళని సిటిజన్ అనేటువంటి దృష్టిలో తీసుకోవడం ఇక్కడ అర్థమా? లేక మన భాషలో రాజ్యానికి ఒక మనిషిగా ఉన్నటువంటి వ్యక్తి ఏం సాధించగలరు అనేటువంటి ఆలోచనతో చేయాలా? వాట్ షుడ్ బి అవర్ ట్రాన్స్లేషన్ ఆఫ్ సిటిజన్? దట్స్ అ question for pondering. And the last point, Swaraj in Ideas, is a lecture delivered by probably one of the best philosophers of pre-independence India, by name Professor K.C. Bhattacharya, in 1931. That was the time when Purna Swaraj declaration was there, and he said, our minds have started functioning as shadow minds. Shadow minds which cannot see light on its own. It sees the shadows of others' thoughts and follows those shadows. To counter this shadow mind effect is necessarily a Swaraj which must be attained. How would that Swaraj in ideas be? I can also give you the lecture copy itself, which is a remarkable piece which must be read by every Indian, because today it is very necessary. Next slide please. This is a native imagination. By native I mean it is something which is part of the BGPA, Vijayawada, Guntupalli and the Mangalagiri region. I just read it out for you in its best expression. Next slide please. Satyapita Pratishtha Bharatasya Samvidhanam, which is in Sanskrit means that Constitution of India is erected on the strong and foundation of Satya, truth. Why is this so? If you look at Constitution of India, any book of Constitution of India, including the English printed version without the calligraphic editions, I don't even require any of those paintings right now for this argument. The first thing that you would notice, insofar as literal presentation of, say, linguistic writing in the Constitution is found in Sanskrit, because after the title of the Constitution of India, what you find is a national anthem, and the national anthem has Satyameva Jayate as its integral part. If that were so, Constitution of India is written in English, but it does not begin with the preamble. It begins with the Mahavakya, Satyameva Jayate. This is the power of, say, the Constitution, which is not recognized all these years. Why is that so? I will explain also, but in a while. Here is an imagination just for serious reflection. This is something which is taking one darshana in mind, and of the Sanatana Dharma, one of it is Vaidika Dharma, and I am giving you a Vaidika Dharma accounting of Constitution through this. I can give you correspondingly a Buddhist version, I can give you correspondingly a Jain version, I can equally give you an Islamic version, a Christian version, you name it, I will give you that in the same lines. Because I have already categorically stated that Indians are a fraternity of seekers of truth. It is with this imagination that the possibility of harmonizing all that we have is existent. Let me read this out just for the sake of saying the nature of imagination which is possible. I have already indicated to you that today is Pushya Krishna Trayodasi, and at this time, 26th of January 1930, the Purna Swaraj Declaration was actually being read by people in different parts of the country. We, Bharatiyas, on the Swastiski Virodhinama Samvatsara Magha Shukla Ashtami Guruvara, Seka 1871, that is the Thursday, 26th of January 1950 in the Common Era. Please notice the distinction drawn in the nature of time, which fell on the sacred Bhishmashtami at 10:10 am, that is in the Kumbha Lagna, installed Sarvatantra Swatantra Purita, autonomously existent with the power to deploy all tantras at will, Bharata Samsthana, which is given the honorable declarative name, Gauravanama, Sovereign Democratic Republic. In such a Sarvatantra Swatantra Purita Bharata Samsthana, all of us, Bharatiyas, having understood, accepted and realized that the Hitopadesha, that is at the crest of the entire Veda, that which is very sacred and is in essence the substance of the entire Veda, Satyameva Jayate of Vedamata, Veda as embodied motherly figure, is the constant eternal guiding light, and thus learning from the instructions of such a Vedamata, adopted the Satyaratha, chariot of Satya, as a sacred flag and established it firmly at all places of the Bharata Samsthana. It need not be asserted with emphasis that the Paramatakya, essential import or the purport of having such an establishment, is to point out that the Bharatiyas, who Vedamata regards as her favorite children, must make their lives holy, pavitra, with the constant reflection of such a bhava, and thereby not only attaining all that is deservedly to be attained in this world, Ahiga, and the other world, Amushvika, and beyond, Nishreyasa, but also to dedicate their lives and act in all such ways by which the exalted nature of Bharatiyas shines with radiant luster in all the three worlds. This is an imagination which goes beyond speaking of there is a material world, spiritual world. This is not a talk which is limiting itself there, because if you look at Sanatana Dharma, there are three tapas: Adi Bhautika, Adi Daivika, Adhyatmika. At all the three planes, there is an imagination of the quality that is necessary. So, a Vedic person, when he actually has to understand Constitution, he looks at all the three planes. A Buddhist has a different version of the same plane. The quality is so imagined. A question could come if there are, say, challenges of different claims to truth. What is the way in which you would enable these things as possible? So there was a question, what is the Constitution that I asked? And my definition of the Constitution, which I believe is something that is worth reflecting, is that if you have seekers of truth of all kinds that are imaginable in the world, the way in which the possibility for each of these peoples to ensure that their quest for truth is enabled and does not have any kind of hindrance, that arrangement is the Constitution of India. And this Constitution thus becomes a Constitution not just for India, but India, that means the entire world can be seen here. And this is something that I say is not just a matter which is stated like this. You do find a statement come from various of our leaders, including that of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, when he referred to Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The reference to Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is something that has to be understood in the essence and the sense in which it was conveyed. The shloka said, Ayam Bandhurayam Neti Ganana Laguchedasam Udara Charitanam tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Creation of people of such Udara Charita. Udara Charita is a question where we have the nature of convictions of people who are such that they are of exalted character, and such exalted character existing in people would necessarily elevate the possibility of imagining what we are going to be, and all of that requires one to be truthful. And this is a call.